Hey guys, we are going to go ahead and finish our Harry Potter book today. Sorry this video is coming to you so late, but you have to remember that I also have a family and things to do around my house. So I will get to it when I get to it, and it might not be at the exact time you're hoping, but it will get to you. So yesterday when we left off, Harry was explaining everything to Professor McGonagall and Professor Dumbledore. And then when they are getting ready to leave, in walks Malfoy's dad. So here we go. I'm going to kind of pick up where we left off yesterday. I'm going to read that last paragraph. So it says, Harry got up and crossed to the door. He had just reached for the handle. However, when the door burst open so violently that it bounced back off the wall, Lucius Malfoy stood there, fury in his face, and cowering behind his legs, heavily wrapped in bandages, was Dobby. Good evening, Lucius, said Dumbledore pleasantly. Mr. Malfoy almost knocked Harry over as he swept into the room. Dobby went scurrying in after him, crouching at the hem of his cloak, a look of abject terror on his face. The elf was carrying a stained rag with which he was attempting to finish cleaning Mr. Malfoy's shoes. Apparently, Mr. Malfoy had set out in a great hurry, for not only were his shoes half polished, but his usually sleek hair was disheveled. Ignoring the elf bobbing apologetically around his ankles, he fixed his cold eyes upon Dumbledore. So, he said, you've come back. The governor suspends you, but you still saw it fit to return to Hogwarts. Well, you see, Lucius, said Dumbledore, smiling serenely, the other 11 governors contacted me today. It was something like being caught in a hailstorm of owls, to tell the truth. They'd heard that Arthur Weasley's daughter had been killed and wanted me back here at once. They seemed to think I was the best man for the job after all. Very strange tales they told me, too. Several of them seemed to think that you had threatened to curse their families if they didn't agree to suspend me in the first place. Mr. Malfoy went even paler than usual, but his eyes were still slits of fury. So, have you stopped the attacks yet? He sneered. Have you caught the culprit? We have, said Dumbledore with a smile. Well, said Mr. Malfoy sharply, who is it? The same person as last time, Lucius, said Dumbledore, but this time Lord Voldemort was acting through somebody else by means of this diary. He held up the small black book with the large hole through the center, watching Mr. Malfoy closely. Harry, however, was watching Dobby. The elf was doing something very odd. His green eyes fixed meaningfully on Harry. He kept pointing at the diary, then at Mr. Malfoy, and then hitting himself hard on the head with his fist. I see, said Mr. Malfoy slowly to Dumbledore. A clever plan, said Dumbledore in a level voice, still staring Mr. Malfoy straight in the eye. Because if Harry here, Mr. Malfoy shot Harry a swift, sharp look, and his friend Ron hadn't discovered this book, well, Ginny Weasley might have taken all the blame. No one would have ever been able to prove she hadn't acted of her own free will. Mr. Malfoy said nothing. His face was suddenly mad-like. And imagine, Dumbledore went on, what might have happened then. The Weasleys are one of our most prominent pureblood families. Imagine the effects on Arthur Weasley and his Muggle Protection Act if his own daughter was discovered attacking and killing Muggleborns. Very fortunate the diary was discovered and Riddle's memories wiped from it. Who knows what the consequences might have been otherwise? Mr. Malfoy forced himself to speak. Very fortunate, he said stiffly. And still, behind his back, Dobby was pointing, fist to the diary, and then to Lucius Malfoy, and then punching himself in the head. And Harry suddenly understood. He nodded at Dobby, and Dobby backed into a corner, now twisting his ears in punishment. Don't you want to know how Ginny got hold of that diary, Mr. Malfoy? Said Harry. Lucius Malfoy rounded on him. How should I know how that stupid little girl got hold of it, he said. Because you gave it to her, said Harry, in flourish and blots. You picked up her old Transfiguration book and slipped the diary inside it, didn't you? He saw Mr. Malfoy's white hands clench and unclench. Prove it, he hissed. Oh, no one will be able to do that, said Dumbledore, smiling at Harry. Not now that Riddle has vanished from the book. On the other hand, I would advise you, Lucius, not to go giving out any more of Lord Voldemort's old school things. If any more of them find their way into innocent hands, I think Arthur Weasley, for one, will make sure they are traced back to you. Lucius Malfoy stood for a moment, and Harry distinctly saw his right hand twitch, as though he was longing to reach for his wand. Instead, he turned to his house elf. We're going, Dobby. He wrenched open the door, and as the elf came hurrying up to him, he kicked him right through it. They could hear Dobby squealing with pain all the way along the corridor. Harry stood for a moment, thinking hard. Then it came to him. Sorry, guys. Professor Dumbledore, he said hurriedly. Can I give that diary back to Mr. Malfoy, please? Certainly, Harry, said Dumbledore calmly. But hurry, the feast, remember? Harry grabbed the diary and dashed out of the office. He could hear Dobby's squeals of pain receding around the corner. Quickly wondering if this plan could possibly work, Harry took off one of his shoes, pulled off his slimy, filthy sock, and stuffed it into the diary. Then he ran toward the dark corridor. He caught up with them at the top of the stairs. Mr. Malfoy, he gasped, skidding to a halt. I've got something for you. And he forced that smelly sock into Lucius Malfoy's hands. What the... Mr. Malfoy ripped the sock out the diary, threw it aside, and then looked furiously from the ruined book to Harry. You'll meet the same sticky end as your parents one of these days, Harry Potter, he said softly. They were meddlesome fools, too. He turned to go. Come, Dobby, I said. Come. But Dobby didn't move. He was holding up Harry's disgusting slimy sock and looking at it as though it were a priceless treasure. Master has given me a sock, said the elf in wonderment. Master gave it to Dobby. What's that? Spat Mr. Malfoy. What did you say? Got a sock, said Dobby in disbelief. Master threw it, and Dobby caught it, and Dobby is free. Lucius Malfoy stood frozen, staring at the elf. Then he lunged at Harry. You've lost me my servant, boy. But Dobby shouted, You shall not harm Harry Potter. There was a loud bang, and Mr. Malfoy was thrown backward. He crashed down the stairs 3 at a time, landing in a crumpled heap on the landing below. He got up, his face livid, and pulled out his wand, but Dobby raised a long, threatening finger. You shall go now, he said fiercely, pointing down at Mr. Malfoy. You shall not touch Harry Potter. You shall go now. Lucius Malfoy had no choice. With a last incensed stare at the pair of them, he swung his cloak around him and hurried out of sight. Harry Potter freed Dobby, said the elf shrilly, gazing up at Harry. Moonlight from the nearest window reflected in his orb-like eyes. Harry Potter set Dobby free. Least I could do, Dobby, said Harry, grinning. Just promise to never try and save my life again. The elf's ugly brown face split suddenly into a wide, toothy smile. I've just got one question, Dobby, said Harry as Dobby pulled on Harry's sock with shaking hands. You told me that you had nothing to do with he who must not be named, remember? Well, it was a clue, sir, said Dobby, his eyes widening as though this was obvious. Was giving you a clue. The Dark Lord, before he changed his name, could be freely named, you see. Right, said Harry weakly. Well, I'd better go. There's a feast and my friend Hermione should be awake by now. Dobby threw his arms around Harry's middle and hugged him. Harry Potter is greater by far than Dobby knew, he sobbed. Farewell, Harry Potter. And with a final loud crack, Dobby disappeared. Harry had been to several Hogwarts feasts, but never one quite like this. Everybody was in their pajamas, and the celebration lasted all night. Harry didn't know whether the best bit was Hermione running toward him screaming, You solved it! You solved it! Or Justin hurrying over from the Hufflepuff table to wring his hand and apologize endlessly for suspecting him. Or Hagrid turning up at 3:30, cuffing Harry and Ron so hard on the shoulders that they were knocked into their plates of trifle, and his and Ron's 400 points for Gryffindor securing the House Cup for the 2nd year running. Or Professor McGonagall standing up to tell them that the exams had been canceled as a school treat. Oh no, said Hermione. Or Dumbledore announcing that unfortunately Professor Lockhart would be able to return next year, owing to the fact that he needed to go away and get his memory back. Quite a few of the teachers joined in cheering that greeted this news. Shame, said Ron, helping himself to a jam donut. He was starting to grow on me. The rest of the final term passed in a haze of blazing sunshine. Hogwarts was back to normal with only a few small differences. Defense Against the Dark Arts classes were canceled, but we've had plenty of practice anyway, Ron told a disgruntled Hermione. And Lucius Malfoy had been sacked as a school governor. Draco was no longer strutting around the school as though he owned the place. On the contrary, he looked resentful and sulky. On the other hand, Ginny Weasley was perfectly happy again. Too soon, it was time for the journey home on the Hogwarts Express. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Fred, George, and Ginny got a compartment to themselves. They made the most of their last few hours in which they were allowed to do magic before the holidays. They played Exploding Snap, set off very last of Fred and George's filibuster fireworks, and practiced disarming each other by magic. Harry was getting very good at it. They were almost at King's Crossing when Harry remembered something. Ginny, what did you see Percy doing that he didn't want you telling anyone? Oh, that, said Ginny, giggling. Well, Percy's got a girlfriend. Fred dropped a stack of books on George's head. What? It's that Ravenclaw prefect, Penelope Clearwater, said Ginny. That's who he was writing to all last summer. He's been meeting her over at the school in secret. I walked in on them kissing in an empty classroom one day. He was so upset when she was, attacked. You won't tease him, will you? She added anxiously. Wouldn't dream of it, said Fred, who was looking like his birthday had come early. Definitely not, said George. The Hogwarts Express slowed and finally stopped. Harry pulled out his quill and a bit of parchment and turned to Ron and Hermione. This is called a telephone number, he told Ron, scribbling it twice, tearing the parchment in two and handing it to them. I told your dad how to use a telephone last summer. He'll know. Call me at the Dursleys, okay? I can't stand another 2 months with only Dudley to talk to. Your aunt and uncle will be proud, though, won't they? Said Hermione as they got off the train and joined the crowd thronging toward the enchanted barrier. When they hear what you did this year? Proud, said Harry. Are you crazy? All those times I could have died and I didn't manage it, they'll be furious. And together they walk back through the gateway to the Muggle world. And that is the end of book 2. So we will start book 3 after spring break. So don't expect any more read-alouds this week because we finished the book, okay? Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you do have time over spring break, see if you can watch the movie and kind of compare and contrast like we've done in class. But the next time I see you for a read-aloud, it will be Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Have a great night, guys. Bye.